Welcome to Bell Brothers Brewing.
Engineers talking about hops.
I'm Curtis.
I'm Cody.
And today we're talking about hops, I guess.
We're talking about hops. So now we're talking about hops today. It's important to note that hops are a plant. Yeah.
Actually, more specifically, it's a flower.
It is a flower.
Cone.
Hops are a tasty cone, but not a pine cone. They may taste piney, they may smell piney, not a pine cone.
So if it's a plant and it's a cone, but it's not a pine cone, then what is it?
I already described that. It's a flower. It's a flower in the Cannabinae family.
Cannabinae? Oh, hold up. Now that sounds like some other family that we might be familiar with in Colorado that allows people to participate in some sort of habitual subject.
Indeed it is.
Nice. Since we've been farming its cousin, how long have we been farming hops?
The first documented farming of hops was in 736 in Haltertau, Germany.
Haltertau, Germany. Now that sounds familiar.
Indeed. There's a Haltertau hop. It's probably named after some old white guy named Haltertau.
Ah, man. You know, those old white guys, they love naming stuff after themselves. So for some reason, they like to believe that they're the first ones to invent something.
Every single time.
I found America.
I found America. I found Africa.
Holy moly. They found a whole continent.
What about all these people already here? Fuck them. I found it.
Speaking of Europe altering history to leverage it to the European centric, when was the first time we used hops in beer?
According to Europe, sometime between the 9th and 12th century.
So we invented beer in Europe, right? Some German, American, pre-existing American or something, right?
American ancestor.
Yeah, some American ancestor in Germany said, you know what? Bam, let there be beer. And that was the first time we figured out beer.
Yep, definitely. There's no way anybody else ever figured out beer
There's
before
no way that beer existed long before that timeline.
That's because it was called ale.
Oh, okay. And what do we do with ale?
Ale is a fermented malt drink made with Gruit.
It sounds like some sort of effed up Oliver Twist kind of, please, sir, I want some more.
I am Gruit. I am Gruit. I am Gruit.
Well, if that's all you're going to be saying, this is going to be a short video.
I am Gruit.
Please explain what is Gruit.
Gruit is a mix of random spices, herbs. Sometimes you got dandelions, spruce tips. It kind of seems like they just took whatever shit they could find and were like, let's put this in a pot and see if it tastes good. Ha
That would certainly explain some really screwed up people.
I mean, it's humans. It's what they do. They're like, can I eat this? Nope, I feel like I'm gonna die. Probably can't eat that.
Now we've got this kind of minor historical aspect of using it in beer, right? Which previously was known as ale.
No. Ale is Gruit and beer is hops. They're two different things until recently. I don't know when. Nobody noted when that occurred. But prior to modern-ish age, I guess, whenever Gruit stopped being used altogether, beer referred specifically to a drink made with hops, and ale referred specifically to a fermented malt beverage made with Gruit.
So we started cultivating hops then in the 9th century for our new beer, right? How did we do that?
Well, so hops are grown on trellises or wires, sometimes poles, depending on what you got available. They're usually grown in rows 7 to 8 feet apart. Because they need a lot of light. That's one of the important notes of hops, is they require a lot of sunlight to work, especially when you're talking about at a industrial level. Hops are kind of hard to grow.
So that would tend to point towards like putting them right smack on the middle of the equator, right? I mean, you want to take it out to like Hawaii, stick it out there where there's plenty of sunlight and just let it rip.
No.
No.
You do not do that. Hops are generally grown in the northern hemisphere between 35 and 55 degrees in latitude.
Now, that's significantly away from our
Yes.
Our equator, right? So that the temperatures at that point would be more considered like temperate?
Very temperate. You're looking at least in America, you've got New York, Washington, Oregon, and California prior to Prohibition were the ones that grew hops. Back to the history of hops. Funny little anecdote is that the Protestants preferred to drink beer over hops in Germany, or over ale in Germany. Do you want to guess why that was?
Probably due to some old white European dude.
Kind of. I mean, yeah.
Oh, okay.
If you want to go that route. It was because of the Pope, because they wanted to say the Pope.
Well, that would be an old white European dude. So yeah, all right, we're good to go.
All right. History is not what we do. Well, other than for beer. Go watch Overly Sarcastic Productions or other history channels. Extra Credits is very good at history. Watch them. Right. We're here for beer and beer history.
So the Pope then started taxing hops.
And so the brewers made stuff with Gruit.
So then they started taxing Gruit.
And they made it with hops.
Well, that seems like a really clear loophole in the whole system there.
Tax loopholes have existed forever.
Why wouldn't we tax both?
They did. They just, whichever one was lower, they taxed and they used the other.
Tax them evenly.
They probably ended up doing that eventually.
Another interesting fact that was shared, and I think this is kind of an interesting technological / engineering aspect, was that the mash hop separator, the machine of the industrial era, was created in 1909. Now, there are so many other inventions that show up after that fact, and yet the first thing we wanted to make sure we could do was brew beer.
Because getting drunk is high priority. I mean, come on. What else are you gonna do?
Well, that shows, I think, the priority of the American people. I think that shows the priority of, well, the human race.
The human race. Everybody has alcohol, and it is top priority.
Speaking of top priorities, who is the top supplier of hops in the world?
Well, Germany, isn't it?
You would think. I mean, because they are the beer connoisseur, the history, the home, the main place. Except that, you know, they're kind of like the size of Idaho. Ohio. God damn it. High states.
Idaho?
Idaho. Idaho. Germany is the size of Ohio. So per capita, I'm sure that like they produce the most amount of hops per capita. But the United States has got a big benefit of space. So United States.
Go in space.
Space Force. The Americans also own the space. So now that we've produced the hops, we've grown them on our trellises, and now we've harvested them with our cool mash hop or mechanical hop separator. What did we do with them?
You dry them in your Osthaus.
That sounds German again.
Dutch, actually.
Dutch.
A lot of Dutch ended up in the hop production trade, and so a lot of different things about hops are Dutch-based. So after you've dried them in your Osthaus, you will either, in the old school Osthaus, now they probably dry them with a big mechanical kiln and all that other stuff.
I'd believe it.
You turn them into either pellets or use them as whole cones. Most home brewers will be very familiar with the pellets because it's the most stable and easy to get a hold of and easiest to use.
Right.
Styled. Sometimes you use wet hop or fresh hops for a beer.
The pellets, I think, give a really big benefit to the home brewer because they're more kind of universally stable in the sense that if I grind everything up and I can take a universal or a sample, right, and you know, oh, this is an alpha acid of X, Y, or Z, and then I mix it into the little pellets, then at that point I've got a pretty uniformity across my selection, and then each one of the bags are gonna be good to go. Now, if we kept it in wet hop form, right, then comb to comb to comb, I would bet that we'd have probably a
lot of variation.
Pretty big variation going on there.
Well, that's why I'm sure even professional brewers fairly use pellets,
right?
Because everybody knows consistency is really important for your beer. So other hop products that exist, you've got some like lupulin. It's hard to say. Lupulin. There you go. Lupulin. That's probably close enough. Lupulin powders, N2 extracts. These are all various forms of conditioning or processing the hop flower usually to reduce variance in the product or to get a specific part of the product, whether it's the alpha acid extract or just the oils. Alpha acid extracts do exist, so you can get just the bittering without any flavor at all. Those are actually really common in big macro brews.
I can think of one that's
and all of those.
Rocky Mountain Fresh.
Rocky Mountain Fresh, and they use a lot a lot of that hop extract.
I mean, you wouldn't want flavor in your Rocky Mountain Fresh.
Of course not. Who wants flavor in their beers? We've covered the history and the farming of hops, sort of intermingled with a lot of jokes and shenanigans. So now we're getting into how you use hops in beer. And there are three main ways you use hops in beer: bittering, flavor, and for the antibiotic properties.
Well, and so I think the antibiotic properties, honestly, are one of the more interesting aspects of that whole discussion, right? And it kind of falls into some more of the historicals, but more importantly, it comes into the history of the IPA. When the Europeans, or more importantly, the British, were sending their ales over to India, they needed something that was going to be stable for the whole trip over and potentially back, but more so over to India. And to stabilize and really help that out, they added more and more hops to it, and thus giving birth to the IPA.
Yep. All right. That's the story that we've been told. Who knows what the truth is? But the story of the IPA is that it's because it was shipped to India, and they put a buttload of hops in the barrels when they shipped them.
Man, it's kind of strange that that story and the history of the IPA revolves around Europe.
Yep.
Again.
Europe. Okay. But the other cool thing is that hops added flavor and bitterness.
Bitterness. Bitter. I was going to go somewhere with that, but now I can't. Nope. Lost the train of thought. Yep. The train came in, and then it derailed. Then it went off in another direction somewhere. Bitterness. The most important aspect. The thing that makes the IPA go round. The thing that helps balance, I think, ultimately, what is the most important, the hops. Sorry.
You stupid.
Helps to balance the malt sweetness.
There you go.
There we go. Like I said, the most important aspect of bringing in that bitterness is bringing balance to the beer itself. You need something to kind of counterpoint to all of those malt flavors and the sweetness that you get out of that, along with some of those other flavors out of your adjuncts and the cool different styles.
So it's all about making sugared broccoli.
Yeah, I said balance, not overbalanced or out of balance.
But sugared broccoli is balanced.
Yeah.
It's bitter and it's sweet.
Yeah, that's not the right kind of, so that is like a perceived or like true sweetness, right? That's something you taste it on your palate. And while we use malt sweetness to bring in kind of that beer flavor, and really you should be using malt sweetness in the aspect of bringing in breads and toasties and caramels and toffees and like all of those really cool malt flavors. And they are sweet on the palate, but they're not sugar.
So how do hops bitter beer?
So what they use is alpha acid. Alpha acid is that inherent aspect of the hop when it's in the comb and we turn it over, and we use that in the boil. And the boil heats it up and isomerizes your alpha acids into a bittering agent. And the more alpha acid you have, obviously you have more content to turn into that bittering agent. And so the higher alpha acids, fantastic for creating really heavy bittering hops. And the lower alpha acids, well, you can have more of them, or they're better for that flavor and aroma aspect of that.
An important note, isomerization is the reorganizing of the molecule that creates the bitterness. For those of you who just don't know the definition of isomerizing off the top of your head.
So if I've isomerized my alpha acid, which takes time, by the way, in the heat, which is why it's the 60-minute hop. Let's go say 40 minutes down the road, and now I'm at my 20 minutes. What am I using my hops for?
You are using those hops for aroma. Those are going to give you your smell of hops, but not as much flavor as a hop that you did at 10 minutes, which is your flavor hop. And then you've got your flavor hop that would come in at 10 minutes. And do you want to explain why we would hop in this sort of order here?
So as you get less and less time in that heat, you get to kind of extract, think tea, that kind of aspect of it, right? And earlier on, when you don't have as much, well, you're not going to be sitting in that hot water for as long, you can extract more of those oils. And those oils, over that duration the duration of the boil, get aerosolized. They basically get shot up into, with all your steam and all the rest of it, and they get sucked out of the beer. And I'm sure there's a term for that, and I don't know it off the top of my head. But what that does is effectively takes those oils that you would normally get for your flavor and more importantly your aromas and removes them. So you want to hop later on in the boil so that you can keep more of those oils around to kind of help bump up those flavors and aromas. We have those 4 types of oils, Cody. What do we use those for? What kind of flavors and aromas do they impart for us?
So farnesene gives you a herbal or spicy note. Your caryophyllene is herbal and also common in your European hops.
That's a mouthful.
Yeah, it is. These are all a mouthful. Your humulene is your spicy herbal, also European hop style. And your myrcene is your floral, citrusy, and piney, which is really common in American hops.
That's American right there. The 3 C's, which
Yep.
are?
Cascade, Citra, and Centennial.
Oh yeah, that's what I'm talking about. That's what you're making an American IPA. You bring those 3 C's in, and that's where you get some Stone IPA.
Stone delicious. Yum yum.
Not a sponsor yet. Stone, send us some stuff.
If you want a sponsor, we would love a sponsor. We don't have one. That being said, when you're making an IPA, you have to do a process known as dry hopping.
Dry hopping.
Dry hopping.
We've got wet hopping, fresh hopping, and a second form of wet hopping. What happens? I think more brewers get this kind of mixed up in one form or another, because we just said wet hopping is allowing it to occur or hopping during the fermentation process, right? The height of Krausen aspect of it. And yet sometimes on the bottle it says wet hop on there, and it means something completely different.
Yes, and I think it's because the fresh hop and the wet hop are easily confused, and there's not really anyone determining which is which.
Right.
So it is easy to say that you wet hopped when what you mean is you used fresh undried hop cones to do this one.
Right.
Or you could say you fresh hopped when you use fresh undried cones.
Right.
And it's just one of those things, like using fresh hops is not new, but it is becoming a in vogue sort of thing. It's coming back right now.
It's an interesting aspect because of kind of the differences, the kind of interesting freshness that you can bring in. I think it brings in certain amounts of vegetal because of that. And I think you could get that mixed up because when you dry your hops, like we talked about earlier, right? You now have hops, right?
That are dry.
In the typical way that we use them. And then when I have not dried them, they are wet hops.
Yep.
And so I am wet hopping with my fresh hops.
Yes.
So it seems like a rather interesting kind of conundrum we could get into. And just know that sometimes you'll see wet hop, sometimes you'll see fresh hop. Typically, when they mean wet hop in the true sense, they mean East Coast.
And that means that you hopped during the fermentation.
Or New England style.
Or New England style. East
Or
Coast and New
hazy.
England style or hazy are all somewhat synonyms.
You got like 4 more different terms for the same thing again on top of that.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's beer.
So beer is not really a standardizing kind of form factor. We just get different terminology. So make sure you pay attention to what kind of terminology and what do you actually mean when you're using them.
And there is one more way of using hops that we have not talked about yet, at least at the homebrew level, and that is the flame out hop. Flame out hops is after you've turned off the heat on your boil pot, you add your hops in then and stir them around, let them sort of settle in there. And that's another way of adding a lot of that aroma and flavor without adding much bitterness, but it's not quite the same as dry or wet hopping because you're not quite cooled yet, so you get a little more of that heat interaction with your hop.
Now I've heard about that being considered whirlpool hopping.
Yes, and it can be called a whirlpool hop, and that's if you have a whirlpool tool. Most homebrewers don't have a whirlpool set up on their boil pot.
You do, it's right here. Bam.
Yeah, yes, it's called spoon in hand, but professional brewers have pumps that will actually whirl the pot, and you throw in your hop then, and they whirl it because they're trying to get all the hop matter in the boil to the center so that they don't have to filter that out later.
Nice. I think we've hit enough. This is a ton of material. If you have any questions or comments, please hit those down below and we'll be happy to answer them post video, or we'll make a new video about it if you got an idea.
Please like and subscribe. Remember to check the YouTube, check the Facebook, interact with us wherever you want to interact with us.
That's right.
This has been Bell Brothers Brewing, engineers talking about hops.
Cheers.